we'll go. Okay, so I want to start with this idea of that people get really stuck on is like, where do I start when I write a piece? Or how do I get my ideas down? Or particularly, how do I organize my writing? How do I build something together? And when I first started asking this question to my teachers, they were uh, uh, kind of evasive, or at least I thought so at the time. They were saying, well, you can just see how it goes, or just write the next thing that comes to your mind. Or then there was more conservative teachers who were like, well, you make an outline, you write down the basic things that you want to write about, you organize it with a Ciceronian rhetorical, Roman numeral, A, B, subset C, and neither the sort of meandering stream of consciousness, which I love, by the way, nor the sort of rigid way of organizing felt like quite enough for me. So I had this question, it was sort of burning. And some of you may know I lived in Japan for many years, and my partner got involved in flower arranging. What does this have to do with writing? And I saw something in these primarily quite older women's flower arrangements that blew my mind. So I'm going to, while I speak, going to share some images and talk about why that might have something to do with your writing. So let's see. Bruce, can you see that image there? You give me a thumbs up if you can, just so make sure that everyone can. Yeah, good. Okay, so you'll notice that it is different than a Western bouquet, which is Western bouquet is generally symmetrical. The right and left side are exactly equal, and there's a lot of empty space in there. And I got very excited by this idea of asymmetry. And I realized that it was a pattern, a layout that juxtaposed dissimilar elements next to each other. Dissimilar but not opposite elements next to each other. And then I started to read about it and learn about it. And I realized that some of these schools of ikebana, which is Japanese flower arranging, were 300 or 400 years old. That this method of putting together flowers and vases, branches, and leaves had been developed as a system of patterns without, so there's, let's see, it's not rigid, it's not hierarchical, it's not like all those buildings that I saw. I grew up in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been there, you've seen all this neoclassical architecture, the sort of Parthenon made over and over and over again, which are sort of, in my mind, sort of brutalist. They're kind of like, this is the United States government, or this is power, or this is, authority. There was no space for me. And that was intentional, I believe. They didn't want to invite you in. I thought, could we do this in writing? Could we have a form of writing that would invite people in to participate in the meaning making instead of force feeding the meaning to them? Okay. On my screen, I'm scrolling through different images. Cheryl, are you seeing new images as we go? Or are you just staying on the same first one? You're muted, Cheryl. So just if you don't mind unmuting me, I just want to make sure that everybody's seeing what I'm seeing.
I've seen 3 images so far.
Great, perfect. Okay. So thanks very much, Cheryl. So this is a Japanese rock garden, probably the most famous one. You'll notice that there's a lot of empty space in it. I say Japanese, but much of this comes from Chinese calligraphy, scrolls, and the way that the rocks are arranged is purposeful, and you can tell that an artist did it, right? They're not just kind of tossed there. They relate to each other in different ways. They group together ideationally, visually with each other in a dynamic way. And so I got excited about, could we develop a way of writing that pulled on this concept that whether it's flowers or whether it's rock gardens, allows for a sense that things have been put together intentionally, but not so rigidly as to force feed the viewer or the reader into a particular pre-digested set of understandings. I find this work exquisitely beautiful, and I could talk for a long time. I actually wrote my master's thesis on this back in 1997. But I wanted to say that this is a schematic diagram. I wanted to say this is something that we can adapt, and this is what I'm going to teach you tonight. I often don't give this little introduction with the flower arrangement because you don't actually need it. You can just start it. But I thought tonight in this free class that I would just offer some of the background for it. Like, to me, the way these arrangements have been put together, I feel invited in, and it feels more like nature and not as much like a rigid force feeding of an idea. Okay, so how are we going to do this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you through a 3-part sequence. And again, this is called cobblings, and it's in the, you can read more about it in the book, but also in a link that I'll send you. I'll actually share in the chat at the end. What you're going to do is take a blank piece of paper, and you're going to make 5 columns on the page. And let's see if I can do this. I'm getting really fancy with my screen share here. It'll look more or less like this. Okay, so you can draw 4 lines on the middle, which should give you 5 columns. And at the top of the columns, which will become lists, you'll have 5 words. I'll read them to you, but they're on the screen. Faces, scenes, ideas, feelings, and questions. I left a little bit more space for the questions there, just because they tend to be more than 1 or 2 words. So what we're going to do, this is phase 1 of this writing experiment, is we're going to create multiple lists, 5 lists in fact, that have to do with the topic or scene or story or internal process that you want to look at tonight or play with. So faces are people, or they could be animals, right? Or, the face of a rock, but that's a little bit more abstract. So let's just call them faces of animals or people, birds. And we won't start yet. I'm just going to walk you through it. Scenes are situations, circumstances, scenes in the theater sense of it, like scene on the stage, but it can be anywhere inside or outside. Ideas, I like to invite ideas in. You may even prefer the term concepts. Feelings, emotions, don't want to disinclude them, and questions. Questions is, I would say, the most radical of them, because you're always told, write what you know. And I want to encourage you to write what you don't know, what you're not sure about. Let me give you a little example. Just ad-libbing. So occurrences in my dreams. So I tend to see a lot of my family members, some of them deceased, dead family members. So I might just start listing the faces. Scenes, I often am on the edge of a cliff in my dreams. I'm getting a little red face because it's some of you I've never met before, but I thought, why don't I go ahead and be vulnerable and share some of my dream scenes. Ideas, right? So there's different ideas people have about dreams, that like all the characters in your dreams are parts of yourself, right? That's a concept. So I want to invite that in there. Feelings, I have everything from fear to arrows to all the human, but I think there's particular feelings that come up more often. And questions, right? These are whatever questions I might have about my dreams that I'm processing. So what we're going to do, this is the part where I'm going to ring the bell, and for about 5 to 7 minutes. I'll give you time to just free associate, and you're going to make as many faces as you can think of, as many scenes, and you don't have to start with faces. You can jump around. You can get 2 feelings down, 1 idea, jump to a question. That provokes 3 more questions. That makes you jump back to scenes. The idea is, this is another key idea, I think, in freedom in writing, is list making is easy. There's no way to make a list wrong. It's infinitely expandable. It's resequenceable. I'm going to stop the share screen here, but in a second, we'll start. I'll give you a chance to ask some questions. This is going to be part 1. So we're going to generate as much as possible in all of those different lists. And in part 2, we'll choose some of them, but we don't have to, you're not going to use all of them. So if there's a face that shows up and you're like, I don't really want to write about Uncle Robert, he was kind of a bore and, aggressive, but, his name came up. I'll just go ahead and throw it down. And if you get some weird word like, extradition just pops into your head, which is what just popped into my head, and I'm not sure whether that's a scene or a face, I'll just throw it down somewhere. Doesn't matter. You want to say yes to the subconscious. So there's a philosopher who I highly recommend to you, one of my favorite. His name is Gaston Bachelard. He's was a French philosopher, and he had a phrase that said, "C'est le stylo qui rêve." It is the pen which dreams. So you want to give permission to your pen to dream. In this moment, whatever comes to your mind, you want to just accept it. It's just showed up. And you want to keep telling the pen and keep telling your mind, yes, yes, yes. Now, in this process, there's no way to do it wrong. And again, you can do it any way you want to. But we do have the sort of 3 basic rules of free writing, which is keep the pen moving, don't read back, don't scratch out. And keep the pen moving, don't read back, don't scratch out. Actually, don't read back and don't scratch out are actually subsets of keep the pen moving. So if you think you're writing the most brilliant stuff and you just want to like wallow in it, just keep the pen moving. If you are irritated with what you're writing and it's not working, keep the pen moving. If you're frightened, keep the pen moving. If you're ecstatic, keep the pen moving. The don't read back and don't scratch out is part of what I was talking about earlier, is this idea that you can avoid triggering that judgmental part of your mind, which is like, was that the right word, or did I spell it right, or I can't even read my writing. It looks like there's a chat message. I just want to make sure. I do have a question. I'll handle that in just a second. Where was I? So the don't read back and don't scratch out, that may be completely new to you. But the idea is that the more you give that encouragement and you're not constantly checking, is it okay, is it right, is it wrong? I think that's one of the reasons people experience writing as suffering, is because we're constantly punishing ourselves for doing it wrong and being an idiot. And isn't that a cliche, right? And it's sort of like a torture chamber for ourselves. Okay, we have another question. Lists in word form or more description for each face, for example. Thank you, Jill. Excellent question. I would say just word form. So for example, if Uncle Robert comes up, I know who Uncle Robert is. So this is just a setup, right? So just the name will be enough, Elias. And it doesn't matter whether anybody else knows who Elias is. So just generate as much as possible quickly. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording or pause the recording here and answer the other question. Okay, great. So we have a question about questions, and I didn't actually cover that. So by the way, anytime the student is confused, it's always the teacher's fault. So the question might be about the writing, like, do I really want to write about dreams? Or do I believe that there's a parallel universe or parallel universes? Or so it would be a little bit more than a word, but just enough so that I can invite in mystery and unknowingness into the process. Does that help, Miriam?
Yes, it does.
Great. Any other questions before we get started? I'm not sure if he wants to be put on the spot, but Bruce, we have a question from Dwayne. I'll give you a second to prepare. Bruce has taken my teacher training some years back. So after Dwayne's question, if you feel like it, Bruce, and you can be like, I pass, I didn't sign up for this. If you want to say anything about this exercise. Okay. Dwayne, what's your question, please?
Yes. Are we making lists, or should we just start writing as these ideas and concepts and words arise? Should we write phrases, sentences, just single words and write later?
Great question. For this period, if you want to do this exercise, just write the list. Just generate as much as possible, because you only have 5 to 7 minutes, right? You're going to generate. From that, we're going to choose some of the items from each of the lists, and then we're going to create a piece of writing then. So just if the idea comes up, so, you know, epidemiology, and you're like, that's a concept, write it down, you know, or epidemiology is bunk, or epidemiology is God. You can do that, something like that. But great. Bruce, do you want to give any advice or any? Bruce is a kind of nice yin and yang to me, because he has a really different way of seeing this about this exercise that you can offer to people.
Well, you're doing a really good job of creating a wholeness. But for me, I really like to stick to the first thing that pops into my mind, and not to censor it or even think about it too much. Just write it down, and it's often the freshest and the truest image or word or little snippet that's living inside you that's trying to be expressed, and so that's my advice.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. We have had someone mention in the chat that what they're writing about might not be appropriate for kids. So if anyone else has that, I'll just make sure that you're in a different group than Lucita. And really, I appreciate you guys welcoming her. She's lovely. Any other questions before we go? Yes, Miriam.
On the concept, I mean, the ideas, you said those are concepts.
Yes.
I'm not certain how, at this early stage, at least for somebody like me, how that, what the concept means or the idea.
Okay. So I've done this many, many times, and sometimes the things I'm writing about don't really have much concepts at all, and that list is short or doesn't even have anything in it. So if nothing comes to you, that'll still be fine. You don't have to have things in it, but it could be anything from, anything from, Keynesian economics to, the theory of gravity, or trauma recovery as an idea, anything that pops up. So you just want to open up, and if nothing comes, it's totally fine.
Okay.
Good. Jamie, you got a question?
Just a comment. It was interesting to me that every time I do your exercises, I have to do them with my hand and then later type up what's done, because I had to force myself to type in order to write. And when I'm writing my book, I just write on the keyboard. I have to, because I can't transcribe. It takes me way too long. But it's interesting to me that whenever I do your exercises, I have to use my pencil and my favorite notebook and my favorite pencil, and then later write it up if I want to, once it's done.
I've had that experience. I do both. So good. All right. So any other questions before we start? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. So, again, I'm only recording the instructions here. So recording again. Part 2 of this exercise is, to me, one of the most exciting parts about it, is where you're going to choose a few items from these 5 lists. So you're not going to choose a whole list. You're going to choose a few items from these lists. And each of those items will grow in part 3 into a full new piece of writing. But I'll explain that part later. Right now, I'd like you to float the clouds of your eyes over your list, your 5 lists, and looking over them, find one that seems like an interesting place to begin. Maybe not the one you were expecting to, maybe even a disjunctive or startling place to begin. It could be a face, one of the faces, it could be one of the scenes, could be one of the feelings, one of the concepts, one of the questions. And don't think about it too much. Be like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'm just going to choose that one and write the number 1 next to that one.
So is it out of any of the 5 columns?
So you can choose from any of the columns, just one item from one column. Just anywhere that seems like an interesting, intuitive, surprising place to start. And I like to write the number 1 with a circle around it so it's easy for me to see. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but that's what it sort of looks like on my page. So what we're going to do now that you have number 1, you're going to choose a second one. Each one will grow into a little chunk of text when we do our writing in the 3rd part, okay? That second chunk of writing is, the second item could be on the same list or it could be on a different list. Okay, so you could go from a face to a scene, or you could go from a face to a question, or you go from a question to an idea, whatever seems interesting. You don't need to worry about it flowing. You don't need to worry about it making logical sense. Just an interesting leap, perhaps a diagonal leap. It doesn't have to be an opposite, it doesn't have to flow. Go ahead and write the number 2 down. Cool. Now, keep going. You're going to go all the way to 7. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And each time you do it, just think about the one before. So now don't worry about number 1. Don't even think about it. What would be an interesting leap or jump or change from 2? And again, any item on any list. And keep going until you have 7. And I'm just going to watch the screen here. So when you've got all 7, give me a thumbs up. And if you finish before others, look over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. See how they fit together. See how they don't fit together. See how they are asymmetrically juxtaposed. Cool. Good. I definitely encourage you to not overthink it. Just be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think most people are ready. Does anyone need more time? Raise your hand if you need a little. Okay, good. Okay, so that's part 2. So what you've done now is you've already created a structure. You've already created a sequence. You've already created, dare I say it, an outline for a piece of writing. Let me explain a little bit how this is going to work. I'm going to give you about 20 minutes, a little bit less, to build a piece of writing from this map that you've made. So for number 1, that'll grow into a chunk. I don't use the word paragraph because 1 might be 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs, half a page, and 2 might be a single sentence, and 3 might be 4 sentences, and 5 might be a whole page. Doesn't matter. If it's a face, it might be a description of a face. It might be a dialogue that you've had with someone. Cheryl, you have a question, please. Unmute though, please. Cheryl, I can't hear you. You have to unmute.
It's,
Okay.
it's linear though. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're not going to go back and forth. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, unless you're breaking the rules, which is a kind of a cool idea.
Right.
Maybe I'll mess with that myself tonight. So now that you've had that list, one is going to be a chunk of writing. And let me kind of show you what that looks like on my page. This is I think I did this last night. I've done this hundreds of times. I've done this with people in China who are second language learners. I've done this with people in Sri Lanka who are tea plantation workers. It really works well. So I have a chunk of writing here for 1. I have a smaller chunk for 2. A larger chunk for 3. It can be any style of writing. It can be any approach. You don't have to stay consistent. And the thing I'm going to encourage you to try is to not write transitions between the chunks. And therefore, that brings me to the reason why, which is number 2. And number 2 is related to number 1 because blah, blah, blah. Trust your reader to be able to make those links. And if after you read it back, you find that you really do want to add that in, you can. No problem later. So in your 20 minutes, you might think, okay, I have 7, should be 3 minutes each. Just let it be more organic than that, right? Just, some might want to be bigger, some might want to be smaller, but do try to get through all 7 if you want to do the exercise as designed. Sometimes people are like, oh, I only got through the first 2. No problem. But sometimes when that happens, you don't actually get the whole structure of it. So I'd love you to have the experience of creating the whole structure of it. So 7 chunks of writing, 20 minutes. I'll be keeping time. So I'll be saying like 16 minutes left, 11 minutes left, whenever I think of it. And again, keep the pen moving. Don't read back and don't scratch out. And remember those images I showed you of the rock gardens and of the flower arrangements. It's going to be just like that. They're just beautiful, or I don't even want to say beautiful or not beautiful. Objects next to each other in relationship that will create a structure that you yourself, the writer, may not be aware of. You can't even necessarily know what it is when you're writing it or evaluate its quality. And in fact, the less you evaluate its quality, the better. In fact, because evaluating is triggering the prefrontal cortex, which is making you miserable and is actually not improving the writing. See if it works. See if it has power to connect itself in the mind of the reader without you having to do all the work. Okay, I want to open it up for questions before we get started, because if you're confused, I would love to answer any question you have. Okay, great. So we'll take 20 minutes for this. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. If you have any questions throughout, you can just use the chat screen. I'll be doing my own writing with you guys, so I might not catch your question immediately, but I'll try to keep on it. And have fun with this. This is your time. This is your time to write. And let whatever happen, happen. And enjoy the process. Keep the pen moving. Don't read back. Don't scratch out. 20 minutes and begin. important part of it. How you get feedback and how you give feedback is extremely important in terms of opening up the writing process. Often people are trying to be helpful and they tell you what's wrong with your writing according to them, according to what they think good writing is, or what they think you should write, or how they would grab the steering wheel from you and make it into their piece. We don't want to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to get into small groups of 3 people each. I might do 2 people each. I'll just decide depending on how much time we have. I'm going to try to pair. This is a good number of people who've taken classes with me before, so hopefully there'll be one person in each group who can model this for you. But basically, the process is the following. You have a scrap piece of paper. Let's say Jamie is reading to me. I am jotting down some words and phrases that Jamie uses, that Jamie has written. I'm not adding any words. I'm just trying to write them down. I'm trying to not be a stenographer and get everything down. I just get what comes past me. Maybe something I responded to, maybe something I felt emotional response to, intellectual response. I like the writing, but I'm not going into the good and bad. I'm just, if I'm having a response, I write it down. I sometimes write it down as a long sentence as opposed to a list down the page, but whatever way you want to write it down. Often people read too quickly. So if you're the reader, read slowly. Otherwise, you're causing your partner to suffer. So when I say slowly, it's at about this pace with pauses in between. That gives people a chance to write down what you've written. Then I read it back to Jamie. And if there's a particular word or phrase that caused me to have a thought, emotion, feeling, or response, that's not a judgment. So it's not like, oh, I like this one better than that one. No, it's not analysis. It's not psychoanalysis. It's not about being right or wrong. It's just how did this cause me to feel? What did it cause me to think about? What did it cause me to remember? As long as the memory is brief, I don't go on to a long thing about Uncle George. I just say, oh, that reminded me of my grandma. You know, it was very sweet, or something like that. So this is an impressionistic feedback. I like to call it phenomenological feedback. So if you want to look up phenomenology later, it's cool. It's also in Writing Open the Mind at the back. What is phenomenological feedback? What is phenomenology? Why should I care? But for the purposes of right now, you read back. I'm going to read back to Jamie some words and phrases that touched me, moved me, and what it caused me to think of. So when you read the part of, and Jamie's in one of my book completion groups, so if it's all right, give me a thumbs up if I can use an example from your book, Jamie. Okay, so when Jamie's a veterinarian, Jamie used to be very involved with euthanizing animals, and now she's an advocate for animal hospice. So when you read to me about in medical school, veterinary school, the first time you euthanized a dog, and I read the phrase, it caused me to remember when I euthanized, I put to sleep, I brought to the vet to put to sleep, and it caused me to consider whether I had done the right thing, even though it was a really hard thing to do. I was supposed to be doing the right thing. Maybe there was another way and I didn't know about it. I'd really love to read your book. That's the kind of feedback that encourages Jamie to keep doing more writing. Specific, those words and phrases. I could take a long time to explain it, but we don't have a long time. So I'm hoping that if you have a doubt as to whether what you're going to say could sting someone, leave it out. If you have a doubt, leave it out. So again, you're just encouraging, and I'm going to try to put you in a group with at least one person who's taken a class with me. So when you get in that group, I think I'll try to do it in pairs just because we don't have a ton of time. You'll have about 15 minutes for both people, so about 7 minutes each, to read and get feedback. So you may not be able to read the whole piece, and I'll try to let you know when it's time to move to the second person. If, for example, Cheryl has been in a group with me and Maddie has never been in a group, I might put you guys together. right? Maddie will read first if she chooses to read. Cheryl will give feedback to Maddie, just so that you have a little bit of a model for that. Okay. Any questions about how that goes? Because if you're concerned or have a worry about it, please ask me now.
Yeah, just a quick one, Andy.
Sure. Yes.
Do you want us to state, like, with each number, do you want us to say the idea or the question or whatever, or just do the writing?
So the answer to this one, thank you, Amos, it's a great question, is you are the artist. So it's different if you state, like, you know, number one, and then you read the column heading or the item heading. And it's different if you don't. So I would say there's pros and cons of either way. Just choose what way feels artistic to you at the moment. Is that good? Someone else had a question. Jamie.
I just want to say the first time you explained it to us, I was really confused until you called it appreciative inquiry. So it's really, how are you appreciating what the gift of someone that they just gave you? And that put a different mindset to me.
Great. So yes, this is actually a field of organizational development called appreciative inquiry. You can Google it later. It's a really cool idea that we find out how to make things better or enjoy them more by appreciating them and inquiring into them. Thank you, Jamie, for that cue. Good. Okay, so it's going to take me a second to set up the groups. So if you need to stretch or use the restroom or something like that, and then we'll come back together at about 7:45 or 7:50 for some wrap up and for you to share. And I might pop around to different groups. Okay, give me a second, and then you'll be in a private breakout room with another person. Hold on for just a bit.